Welcome to the Work Done Right podcast, where we talk with industry professionals to discuss best practices in construction, manufacturing, and maintenance. I am your host, Wes Edmiston, Director of Product with Cumulus Digital Systems and 15-year construction industry veteran.
All right, so super excited to do a podcast mashup with Wes. Thanks for taking the time and joining, doing this cross pod.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do this, Todd. I think this is going to be a blast for me, getting to talk with you, learn everything about podcasting from really the number one construction podcast out there. So looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. There's so many podcasts coming up in the construction scene now, so it's really fun to get to mix it up with new people coming in and hearing their perspective. I think that's what's so cool about construction is there's so many different perspectives and people entry points into the industry that it's fun to get to sit and just learn and pick people's brains.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this, like you were saying, this podcasting group, there are a lot more shows coming up just like mine. Mine's really new as well. But it's an interesting community of people also. So yeah, again, just looking forward to doing this. Thanks for making the time. Yeah.
So how did you kind of get into the industry to begin with?
I've been in construction since I was a teenager. Really, I was actually on a show here recently, told a story. It dates way back to whenever I was in junior high, and the town that I was living in, half of it got wiped out by a tornado. So I started helping my stepdad to rebuild houses in town. But later, late teens, early 20s, I was a pipe fitter at a fabrication facility, and while I was going to college, I was working two jobs. That was one of them. And whenever I was about 20 years old, I ended up moving to Texas and started building offshore oil platforms. Again, as a pipe fitter, after a little bit of time there, I became a foreman and general foreman, started traveling around in different capacities for different companies on different projects, built LNG facilities, carbon capture facilities for a bunch of different clients. And along the way, ended up getting picked up by Shell, started doing inspection for Shell on some LNG facilities, liquefied natural gas. And then from there, after a little while, I became a lead inspector, then a completions manager. And then I got pulled up to Pennsylvania on a large polyethylene facility where I was the senior inspector over piping, mechanical, all things welding, coatings, insulation, structural, civil, really just about everything other than electrical. And I also dual-hatted there doing project management over all of their commercial buildings as well. So that's kind of how my story through construction. And then after I left Shell at the beginning of 2022, I started working here with Cumulus. I'd been actually a customer of theirs for about 5 years through Shell. And through the work that I'm doing with Cumulus, I ended up having the joy of starting the podcast. So that kind of brings me to here.
Yeah. So how did you get from the field side of things? What took you over to the dark side of construction tech?
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Or really, the light side, I'm a technology guy, so maybe it's coming over to the light side.
Yeah, it's definitely a different sort of side. Yeah, I guess kind of the through the years of using the product, I guess to start it is the first Shell project wherever I was actually a Shell representative, whenever I was an inspector, I had just been made lead inspector, and we were rolling out the flagship Cumulus product, which is called the Smart Torque system. And just as any beta project, it had its kinks, and a project manager on that job, since I was the young guy, clearly I know technology. He came up with a Bluetooth wrench and a tablet, set it on my desk and said, make this work, and just walked away. So I started working around the Cumulus team. They're actually part of Shell's TechWorks division then, and got really interested and involved in it, helped them to get the product to a really good spot. And along the way, actually started working with a couple of other technology companies as well around some of the products that we were deploying on projects. Ended up taking this product with me up to Pennsylvania whenever I went up there as well, and just continued, building my relationship with the Cumulus team whenever they spun out on their own away from Shell, and just continue to refine their product as well as a couple of other technologies. And I got really interested in the space. Again, coming from working on my tools to start, and then really working at just about every level and seeing construction from just about every angle. I see the value that technologies bring, and I wanted, as I left, working on the road, working construction, the conventional means, I still wanted to continue on that work, and happily landed here at Cumulus.
Yeah, nice. So I come at the industry from 180-degree difference and entry point. It was I like to say it's a happy accident that I stumbled my way into construction. My whole background is in marketing and on the technology space, and then 9 years ago I found a company called Applied Software, where I still am today, and lead their marketing team. But coming in, and Applied is all about construction technology, and really throughout the whole AEC and manufacturing industries. And then we launched the podcast about 5 years ago in a rough form. It was a Facebook Live series then that was, it is what it is.
Yeah, right.
It was not.
So it's not one of those things. It's not one of those things that you promote and tell people that they need to go dig that up. Huh? It's
no.
You probably should.
The early ones, but it was our sandbox that we were testing things out. But originally when we launched it, honestly, we thought we were going to be the full AEC, and coming in biasly, I thought it would be more architects than on the construction side. I thought architects would be more willing to talk, and what I found was the direct opposite, is that construction people were super willing to talk, especially when you get into the MEP trades. They were like, yeah, let's share everything that we know. And so just through the course of the conversations, fell in love with the industry even more. And, I get the pleasure of being the dummy in the room and be like, all right, I'm going to ask all the stupid questions that are out there, and you tell me what you know. And so that has been a really cool experience to get to see the industry from all these different vantage points and hearing different perspectives of it. So I can come in kind of as a objective third party almost, and see the bigger pictures and where the pitfalls are without having the emotion attached to it. Cause I haven't experienced the on the ground in the field in the way that everybody has communicated to me. So I just get to kind of synthesize all these pieces of information coming at me.
Right. So you don't have your own biases around, oh, no, that's not how I would have done that. You just get to sit there and be like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And, you say that, you get to be the kind of the dumb guy in the room. One of the things that I found, because I got to be honest, really getting into construction, at least making a full career out of it, we'll say was a happy accident for me as well. This is not what I intended on doing with my life. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, but kind of life happened.
That's a big left swing.
It's very different than what I'm doing now. I can tell you, I'm certainly not a surgeon, but even all things considered, after just being in the trades for quite a while and doing everything that I've done, even still, that's the thing for me that was always really striking, is that there are so many people that, they'd started doing this whenever they were teenagers, and now they're in their 50s and 60s, that the amount of knowledge that they have is striking. It is unbelievable. And constantly I would find that even in my most senior positions that I've held and where I am in many ways the subject matter expert, I'm still not the smart guy in the room. I have so much left to learn. And that's why I enjoyed starting the podcast. This is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I've always learn from talking to others. That's what even whenever I was starting off as a pipe fitter, I'd finish up what I was doing and then go find somebody else and figure out what they were doing so that they would teach me something more and something new. And I like to just ask questions. So getting to do that in a forum like this and share it with other people, I think is just amazing. Yeah.
That's what I really like and appreciate about the construction industry is if you come in with the humility of like, hey, I don't know this, but I'm willing to learn and hear what you have to say and kind of your perspective of it, people are really willing to take the time and explain it and show you and walk you through it. It's when you come in and say, no, I know that. I got that. When you don't, you're found out real quick in construction. So why even try to pretend it? Like I always tease, you would not want to walk into a building that I put together. It would collapse down on you. But, you just want it. So I am super grateful and appreciative of people in the industry that can do all this amazing stuff, because without the construction industry, society falls apart. And I feel like construction doesn't get its due in the public sphere as what it really deserves.
Yeah, a lot of people, they'll say the words skilled trades, but not really understand that there is a lot of skill to it, right? They don't really appreciate the aspect of the technique and the knowledge that it takes in order to do a lot of this work. And again, I'm probably somewhat biased because I did it, but really and truly, it is. There's a lot that goes into it, and people take this kind of lowbrow approach whenever it comes to construction. But whenever we're talking about these are organizations that many of them are doing, many construction companies these days are multi-billion-dollar companies. If we approach that situation, just that snapshot of information from any other angle, people would be like, oh, wow, that's impressive. Oh, wow, you're working within an organization like that. But if you say construction, people kind of, well, that's no big deal. You're just building buildings. Oh, anybody can do that. It's Legos, but it's not. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. Why do you think that stereotype is so prevalent?
I think that it's largely to do with the fact that you end up getting to this position where people, it's almost binary. People go to college or people get into the trades, and if you don't go to college, you're kind of seen as you don't have the same level of intellect. And for better or worse, however people formulate their own opinions, that's their business. But I have a degree. I got a degree along the way. I continue going to college online just because, as I start something, I want to finish it. And I can tell you that I learned an awful lot more in the construction trades about how to interact with people, about how to manage people, about really, honestly, anything and everything about how force works on a building and all sorts of things. And I learned far more than I did just getting my degree. But I don't know, what's your perspective on it? That's something that I'm really intrigued about with someone. You've been hosting a show for, like you said, coming up on 5 years now, and you've talked to a lot of people in the industry. You're coming in with this third person perspective. What's your take on it? Have you had I guess a shift in your perspective on the industry since starting your show?
Yeah, for sure. There's been a big shift. I came in with some of the biases against construction because I didn't know any better. That's so this is because of my marketing background and just the way I view the world through marketing and imaging and branding and all that stuff. There's obviously a huge marketing and branding problem in construction, and that's what's leading into the skilled labor shortage and not being able to attract new people into the industry. And I've been really fascinated by that. I've pulled that cord. My listeners are probably rolling their eyes if they hear me say the marketing problem in construction, because I talk about it all the time. But it's prevalent. And what I really mean by that is construction does, frankly, a bad job of promoting and showcasing what is actually happening in the industry. They leave it to other people to tell their story for them. And if they don't give an accurate representation of it, then those people have no idea what's happening. So construction, the onus is on people in the industry to share the technology that's in the space, the innovation that's in the space, the creative problem solvers that are here in the space. And that's actually a aspect that has been a very eye-opening experience of like, oh, there's tons of creative problem solvers in the industry. And when that light bulb went off, it was like, that is the dumbest thing that is taking me by surprise, because obviously you have to be a creative problem solver to build a building. That's the very nature of everything that gets done on a day-to-day basis. But for some reason, I don't think I'm alone. The lack of seeing that on the surface, and yeah. Anyway, that was a long ramble, but I think construction has to own their story more.
No, that's a really interesting point too, because whenever I was leaving Shell, right, I'd been in the construction industry about 15 years at this point, and I had made up my mind at the end of this project, I'm resigning. I'm going to, out of the 10 years that I've been with my wife, we've lived in the same state. At that point, about 4.5 of them, because I was traveling all the time. So I was like, it's time that I probably have a semi-normal life. I had this personal dilemma because I never thought I would be able to find another job that was as dynamic and would have the sort of requirements that working on a multi-billion-dollar project has. Just because there's every single day, there is some pretty high amount of brain power that goes into solving the complex problems that are there. And I never really thought about the fact of, we don't present that well. You're right. You're absolutely right. But what could we do to I guess, better brand ourselves? What can companies do to better entice people in high school and in college to go to the construction trades, to get into the industry in some fashion by promoting these aspects?
Yeah, I think there's a twofold thing. A is exposure, and going into even earlier, going into elementary schools and middle school. I think by the time they get to high school, it's too late. Everybody's really already made up their mind on that binary choice. If they haven't been exposed to construction by the time they get to junior year, then they probably have already baked whatever their biases is. Either way, they bake that into the equation. So you got to get to them earlier. And there's something just inherently cool about construction. My 7-year-old is just mesmerized every time he sees a construction site, and we'll sit there and watch it for hours if we let him in. He has, in fact, watched it for hours in the past. And there's something really cool about that. And so I think we have to go into elementary schools and middle schools and show the cool side of construction, and not just what you see on TV and the bad stereotypes and raps that construction gets on TV. So that's the first part: exposure, and go young. Don't be afraid to go into middle school and elementary school. The second is the storytelling aspect of it, and being able to. That's what really grips people and convinces people and pulls people over to your side if they can relate to a story. And everybody on the job site has that ability to tell a story. We all have phones, close by us. There's social media is prevalent nowadays. We're all basically brand ambassadors of whatever company and job site that we're on. Even if you don't think that you are, especially if you're on like something like LinkedIn and you're associated with the company, you're 100% a brand ambassador of that company. So don't be afraid of that and kind of own it. It's a really cool superpower almost that people in a decade ago, they didn't have that ability to be able to own some of the brand of a huge multi-billion-dollar construction company. Now we have that ability, and now the responsibility and the onus is more on everybody as well too to take up that calling.
Yeah, those are really good points. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, especially and then there's also the aspect of what it is that you're doing here, right? Giving people a platform in order to share the stories on something like a podcast. The audience is slightly different at that point, but yeah, I think that you're right with also going in early, going into elementary schools, middle schools, junior highs, and kind of sharing some of that appeal and really promoting the trades. It definitely needs to start young.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the podcast aspect of it. Obviously, most of the people that listen to my show, I'm sure your show as well too, are already in the industry. So those two areas don't apply. But what I have found interesting is people will say, "Oh, thanks for sharing the innovation that's happening even inside the industry," because it's so easy to feel like you're kind of alone on an island. And podcasts, even that are meant for the industry, it is encouraging to them of, hey, there are other people that are out there doing really cool, amazing things and helping to push the industry forward. So keep charging. You're not charging that hill on your own. There's a whole army alongside of you. And a lot of times it can feel like, it's just me doing the grind and this is useless, but it's not. And so I think podcasts have an awesome, obviously I'm incredibly biased, but I think podcasts have an awesome ability and platform to really kind of bolster the troops, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting too, because at the same time, when everybody's always saying, construction is a really small world, everybody knows everybody. It's amazing how small of a community it is. You can always find somebody that you're connected to if you meet somebody else. But at the same time, projects are so siloed and we have no idea what everybody else is doing. And some of that's by design, right? There's intellectual property. There's various reasons why it is that people don't share this information. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. And now I'll share the sentiment. I'm biased as well. Now hosting a show, podcasts play a pivotal role. Everybody needs to listen to podcasts, especially the Bridging the Gap podcast. But yeah, I agree. It's great getting to share these stories and just continue to spread the message.
Yeah, absolutely. On the technology side, I'm curious, as you have kind of shifted over into software and tech space, what have you seen as far as the industry maybe getting wrong when they seek to implement new software and tech?
Getting wrong. One of the things that, and this is a recurrent message, I imagine you've had people on your show already that have said the same thing, that, some of these companies that are popping up, they're really a solution that's looking for a problem. People really need to start off with a problem, identify, what the available options are for the technology, and then go outward from there. One of the things that I do see a lot, though, that I think is interesting, I see why it happens, but also working for a company that specializes in construction technology, I see it the opposite side as well. There are a lot of homegrown solutions that are being developed right now within companies that it seems really inefficient to do it. And what I mean by that is there are companies that will replicate effectively the same system as what another private company is doing right now. And they'll pay to maintain that system, and also to construct it, to maintain it, to carry it over and manipulate it from site to site to site to make it applicable for all these different use cases. So they're having to build up a significant amount of resources to do this, when they could literally just go slightly further outward and say, why don't we procure this system that already exists? And part of the reason why they don't is because they don't know what all is out there and available. Awareness of the construction technologies that are present, I think, is very low. And honestly, in my opinion, that's one of the areas where we tech companies are doing a bad job, and where different sites could be doing a better job as well of sharing their success stories, because I think that brand recognition of some of these different companies is extremely low, and it's really impeding people from finding the solutions to the problems that they might actually have.
Yeah. Well, it's also really overwhelming too, because there's so many construction technology companies that are out there, and more pop up every day, it seems like.
Right.
So how do you keep up with the new technologies coming online?
In some ways I don't. At this point in my career, I will say that one of the things that I'm more interested in doing is refining our process as best we can. I guess is a kind of in some ways that's short-sighted, but in other ways, I really focus. I've always been this way. I do everything I can to focus on the problems that I have directly in front of me, and whenever I get to a position where I feel then that everything is bulletproof, resilient, and perfect, then I will begin to extend outward and look for more fires to put out. But I feel like the reason why I do that right now is because honestly, like you're alluding to, there are so many different technologies that pop up every single day. And then, you have everything else that's in the common sphere of the chat GPTs and AIs. It can become a distraction. And if something is needed, if something is worthwhile to integrate into our system, or, if this is something that I would want to share with somebody that I worked with on projects before, because I still talk with people that are on projects all over the world, and we talk about potential solutions. Then somebody else will bring this to my attention. I'm rather confident of that at this point. Somebody else on my team anyway. But what about you? How do you? I mean, you work for a construction technologies company as well. How do you just absorb the sheer magnitude of products that are out there on the market these days?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I don't think anybody can keep up with them individually by themselves. There's just too much, and then you add up all the updates to the existing software. You're never going to be totally up to speed.
It's impossible
on everything out there. Yeah, so I think you got to kind of specialize some in what you're looking at, and the range that you're looking at. I also really encourage people to figure out what their North Star is and what they're trying to get out of the technology, or what they're trying to get not out of the technology, but what just workflow wise, and then start working backwards from there. I think one of the biggest problems that we experience a lot with our clients is they're just trying to throw software at a problem, but they haven't really thought out where you're trying to get to and what you're trying to accomplish. And as a big fan of technology and software, if you're just putting software in for the sake of it because the other guy's doing it and you were told that you need to, good luck. It's not going to go well for you. You got to have a plan. You got to have it mapped out. You got to have a long roadmap and vision for where you're going to go with that and how it's going to solve a business case, not just let's implement this shiny software and pray and hope it's going to solve all of our problems, because it's not. It's more than likely probably going to create more problems and headaches for you when you don't have that plan. When you do have that plan, it goes a lot smoother. It's not perfect. There's always going to be bumps and bruises along the way, but it's a lot smoother for sure.
Yeah. No, digitalization for the sake of digitalization is just, it's a disastrous plan, because it's not a plan, right? Like, oh, well, we want to convert something into a digital record instead, just something that rudimentary. Well, that's great and all, but what are you thinking about the full of the system and the implications for everybody involved? What is this going to do to scope, to schedule, to everything? I agree completely.
And how does it play with other software that you already have in your tech stack? Because so you could have two awesome pieces of tech stack, but maybe they're in conflict with each other and then they both fall down. So you don't want to do that. You gotta really think it out, because it could be a major headache for you.
Right. So I'm curious, Todd, what are some of the lessons, I guess the biggest lessons that you've learned as far as like, software implementation, technology implementation on sites, just from hosting this show? And are there any like recurrent themes overall that you end up seeing from the conversations that you have? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's one of the big ones is plan before you do things. Take time to really create that white space. And it's hard. I get it. Everybody's moving so fast that it feels like it's wasteful almost to take time and sit down and think through and plan it out. But I challenge that on you don't have the time not to sit and really map it out and plan it out, because it's just going to bite you later, and you're going to spend more time trying to fix the messes and problems that were created that you could have flushed out a lot of that on the front side. So take time on the front side. As far as a lot of themes that have popped up over the years, your basics kind of interoperability and how to connect all those platforms together. How do you really leverage the data and then create sustainable workflows or modular construction and prefab and everything that's happening there as well too. But what I'm always kind of amazed at is inevitably, even if we're on a pretty technical conversation, all roads seem to lead back to people. Even in construction, which on the surface is like, no. It does. And it's the soft skills that are needed. How do you communicate really well with somebody else? I'm going back again to me kind of coming in as the objective outsider. It's fascinating to me because I can hear where like architects are coming from, and I can hear where GCs are coming from, and then when the subs are coming from, and I'm like, yeah, that's really annoying, and these pains that you have dealing with these other people. But do you realize you're kind of saying the same things? You're just using different words, but what you're trying to get at is the same. And then it's fun to kind of see those light bulbs go off of like, yes, I haven't thought of it from their point of view and perspective. And so the industry is, it seems like there's all this conflict within it, but when you pull the onion back, you're really all going through the same pains and the shared problems and stuff, that if people would come in and communicate better on the front side of a project and lay out their goals and put the weapons down at the beginning, that wouldn't do everything, and it wouldn't be a silver bullet. It's not a kumbaya kind of moment, but I think seeing the other side, if you will, as a person will eliminate a lot of pain throughout the project, because everybody's working to the same goal. There's different perspectives and different ways to go about it, but the end goal is all the same. So all roads tend to lead back to better communication skills.
I couldn't agree more. The first project wherever I worked as the client, I was working for the contractor, and the contractor that I was working for, we finished up our scope of work, and I was leaving. I was going to go to a different project, actually with a different company. I was going to take a role as superintendent working for a buddy of mine. And as I was walking out, I ended up running into one of the Shell guys, and he was, where are you going? And I said, I'm going home for a while first, and then I'm probably going to Houston. And he said, no, you're not. And he, ended up sent him my resume, got picked up by Shell. Anyway, the point of that is so I worked as the contractor, and then I worked as the owner on the same project. And then there I am working as the owner and hearing the inverse reciprocal of everything that I was just hearing whenever I was working for the contractor, right? It's just like, we're the good guys. This is the problem. This is what we need to do. They're the bad guys. And then you turn back around, you're working for the owner now, and then you hear that same thing. It's just like, wait a minute. So if I can interject real quick, they're saying the exact same thing you are, just so you're aware. There's a disconnect in here. And it's so interesting to see exactly what you're saying, that if you just stop for just a second and see the other person as a human, if you think about yourself in the other person's shoes, and it was easy for me because I literally was, right? If you think about yourself in their shoes, you can get to the answer, you can get to the end result, you can de-bottleneck whatever it is that's holding you up and work to an effective solution. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Communication somewhere in there is entirely flawed, and we have these biases and these ideas around who the other person is before we ever even meet them. And that needs to change. Very much needs to change.
Yeah, for sure. And even something as simple as the terms that people use. Like, again, I get to come in and be the dumb guy. So people use a term and I'm like, all right, what do you mean by that? People will use the same acronym and same term differently. And you're like, oh, well, this is the same. I don't get your definitions here, but right. Okay, now that I know your definition, I can start talking and go down this trail. I don't know if that's the right definition, but you're using it this way, so I'll go with it. And I think that leads to a lot of frustrations, because if you don't stop and say, all right, what are you actually meaning by whatever phrase that you just said, then you're assuming based on what your definition is of it, and that can lead to a lot of, what happens when you assume. It doesn't go to a good spot. So taking the time to slow down and ask those kind of dumb questions of, what did you mean by that? How do you define this? I think that would solve some of the bumps along the way there too.
I agree. And it's one of those things that, and I know we all do it even in our personal lives, right? But how can I say this? It's interesting that most people, whenever they're in these roles, whether they're just a tradesperson, whether they're superintendent, project manager, contracts person, whatever they are, They assume that because they're in that position that they have to know the answer to whatever it is that the other person's talking about. Even if it's something just as simple as, an acronym. What is it that you mean by that? People just take, okay, I can assume that I know what this means, and they walk away and they can get things drastically wrong. But if people would just take this approach that almost like they're learning a new language, if they're in an environment that somebody's speaking an entirely foreign language, and over time you'll pick up on this. I don't know if you've ever been in an environment like that, but I worked in South Texas for a long time and I was on night shift on a project where 85% of the folks were from the Valley, and probably around half of those folks spoke Spanish as their primary language. So I was surrounded by people, and I spoke a little bit of Spanish at the time. I'm pretty fluent in it now. And, I had to be very aware of what I don't know. And just, you get used to asking the question of, can you repeat that? Can you explain that? What did you just say? Just over and over and over again. And then, and then there was a time that I had a bunch of roommates that were all from India, and I was learning to speak Hindi because I like languages. And the exact same thing, right? Well, can you explain what you mean by that? Even just the simplest of words. Can you repeat that? And if you take that approach with kind of everything on site, you don't have to know everything. Like you said in the beginning, if you take this approach of humility in the construction industry rather than being this kind of proud, bullheaded sort of person, you can get a lot better. You can learn a whole lot more, and people will respond to you a lot better. If you take that same approach with your contractor as an owner, or with your owner as the contractor, things will actually go a lot better than you seem to think. People aren't just going to turn around and smack you in the head for it. They're going to want to help.
Yeah, for sure. To put it in more real terms, I'm amazed that a concept as seemingly widespread like BIM for the industry. I have asked, what is BIM to people, and I will get for anything from, it's a software that you use, to it's a full blown, all things digital. You have no paper anywhere in your workflow at all. Everything's in the model, and everybody's connected to the model, working in real time. I'm like, those are. And the BIM side of like, we're just we're taking our paper and we're just sketching it out in CAD and stuff. And you're like, none of that falls in the same definition. Those are drastically different. So I think it is super helpful to take time and be like, okay, now this is what you mean by BIM. We're way back over here at the starting line. That's helpful for me to know in context, and then we can slowly start marching over to where BIM actually is. But unless I stop and I know that they're over here at the starting line, then I might be talking way out of left field, and they're like, this guy's crazy. I have no idea what he's saying to me,
Right. Yeah. So, hey, Todd, I wanted to ask you a question, kind of personal for me. You started off as a Facebook Live kind of podcaster, and you continue to expand this out and grow it, and it turned into the podcast that it is now. You're on, how many episodes have you released now?
We're right around 200.
That's incredible. Good work to you and the team. How did you grow the show as you have, and how did you kind of continue to pursue down that path? Did you ever have times where you were like, should I even be doing this? Is this worthwhile? How's that gone for you?
Yeah, slow and steady is how that went. It's been a fun journey. It's the guest. I will always point back to them. That's what makes the show, is bringing on these really cool, thought-provoking people throughout the industry, and just again having that humility to learn from them and get their understanding. But as far as like some practical stuff, social media has been huge. LinkedIn is our greatest friend. It's also my I tease it's my drug of choice. It's maybe a problem, but I love LinkedIn and being able to connect out to other people and other just like hearing the stories that come across my feed, and reaching out and being like, hey, love what you're doing there, and striking up the conversations. That's been really helpful to expand my network and be able to reach out and see what else is going on in the industry that isn't in my sphere that I might not be aware of. But yeah, slow and steady and consistency on the podcast for sure.
Yeah. Are there any other tips you'd give to, if say by chance you were talking theoretically to a person that's just starting off podcasting, are there any other tips you'd give?
The consistency is the biggest. People, it's funny because they feel like with the podcast, they build it into their schedule. So I've had people say like, we post every Wednesday morning, and they're like, I know, Thursday morning, the podcast is already going to be there and I'm going to listen to you while I'm working out. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird, but go for it. That's when you want to do it. Cool. I don't need to know that, but people build it into their schedule. So having a consistent time and kind of sphere of topics and stuff that you talk about. And then a thing that I had to honestly wrestle with for the beginning of it was the imposter syndrome of, I come in not with a construction background yet. I'm talking to these incredibly smart, awesome people throughout the industry. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, I like talking to people, so that's fun for me, but I had to kind of overcome, I don't have to know every single thing that they're talking about. I've learned a ton over the years of listening to people, but some stuff still totally goes over my head, and that's okay. I don't have to be totally in the know on every single thing. I can, again, ask those kind of stupid questions and just seek to learn and hear their story. And that I do have a voice that can contribute to the conversation, even if I don't have the firsthand experience exactly like they do.
Yeah, I think, again, the fact that you don't try to act like you know it all, and taking that more humble approach, I think people can respect that a whole lot more. Even people in the industry, we're pretty bad about this idea that we act like just because we've been on site, we know everything. And that doesn't do anything to earn new friends. So no, I think I've listened to quite a few of your episodes. You do a very good job. So whatever you're doing, keep it up. And yeah, I appreciate, if I meet anybody that happens to be starting up a podcast, I'll be sure to give them the feedback that you just gave.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's yeah, for sure. It's a fun ride. I think anybody that is thinking about it, then go for it. The water's great.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a lot of fun. So here's one of my favorite questions that I love to ask guests. If I could give you all power and you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the construction industry, what would you choose to innovate?
That's a good question. I think one of the areas where we have the biggest shortcomings is oftentimes getting material on project at the right time, the right material at the right time. And, whether that's because something turns out to be a longer lead item than they thought it would be, whether that's, so it ends up being not all of the components are on site at the right time, what have you. I don't know what this solution would look like, but if there was a way in order to solve that problem, either through innovations to be able to better predict, we have these components, we will have these components at site with a higher level of certainty, and to be able to map the plan accordingly. I think solving that problem effectively would end up keeping people far more productive. And I'm saying this from my own personal experience and from what I've seen on site for 15 years or so. One of the areas where it always just killed me was whenever we would start working in a particular area and we would have 7 out of 8 needed components, and we would find out midstream that we need to pivot and go on to something else. It just creates unbelievable levels of inefficiency, and being able to effectively solve that problem would streamline projects and be able to get things built, I can tell you, a whole lot faster.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Agreed. What is really the most frequently cited issue that you think that people aren't really attacking, I guess? Are there any issues that you hear, I guess, reoccurrent themes that you're hearing from people that, they're screaming, we have these problems, but nobody's really identifying potential innovative solutions for it?
That's a great question. The thing that's popping into my head first thing, so gut reaction, is interoperability of how do you take all these great softwares and platforms and get them to talk to each other and funnel the information seamlessly through each one. There's so many data silos that these awesome softwares are creating, and then you have the problem of the GC has a particular software that they use, which is different than the subs, which is different than the owners, which is different than the architects. And so how do you get them all on the same page? The industry is starting to talk a good game of open dialogue and really connecting all those dots. But then we're also hand-tied in that not all the softwares and platforms are talking and friendly with each other and wanting to pass that data back and forth. So it's creating a hurdle, or you're having to do multiple entry depending on the project. And so being able to streamline that and simplify it's a big lift, but that's a needed lift. I think that's once we are able to make some good strides in that area, that's going to really help level up and kind of create the next evolution of software development for the industry.
Yeah. I think there's also a lot more, and this is something that my CTO talks about quite a bit. And I think that standardizing the data so that these systems can communicate a little more effectively would be a huge win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense for sure. Very cool. Well, thanks for taking the time. This was really fun. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. We should do this more often. And periodically I go to Atlanta, so if anything, we can stop in, see each other, and we can have a drink sometime.
There you go. I like it. Invite's always open.
Appreciate that. If you're ever here in the Midwest, by all means, reach out. Let me know. I'd be happy to see you.
Sounds good. We'll do.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of the Work Done Right podcast. Please help us out by subscribing and leaving us a review. And as always, our show notes are linked in this episode's description. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.